Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and one of the most exciting yet complex aspects of my collecting journey was collecting for the Nintendo Switch. And it's for a few reasons that I want to talk about here in this video. The Nintendo Switch, in a lot of ways, feels like this almost ubiquitous platform where no matter what genre or type of game you're into, there is going to be something for you. And there's probably going to be a lot of that something for you because there's an abundance in almost every direction when it comes to the genres of video games that are available to you on the Nintendo Switch. And I've seen how Switch collecting has evolved over the last 5 years, especially considering the introduction of the Switch 2. Now, the Switch was a console that I collected for heavily. And I had made it all the way up to roughly around 350 to 375 games in my collection when I realized that I needed to simply stop. I needed to stop because there were too many games coming out at once, and it was nearly impossible to keep up with everything that was coming out. And it started to feel like a black hole when it came to just the amount of money that was being spent between the AAA titles that I wanted to get, the limited releases that I wanted to get, and then just anything that struck my interest or looked interesting to me. And so because of that, I decided to put a pause. But before I put a pause on my Switch collecting, I tried to narrow my scope down to pretty much only niche games and niche titles. And while I thought that I was doing something different, it turns out that there were thousands, if not millions, of other Switch collectors who were kind of thinking in the same way, which only made collecting some of those more niche titles that much more difficult or that much more harder to find. And so what I said to myself was that I was going to pause on Switch collecting and return to it later on down the road. But choosing that option presents a unique set of benefits as well as a unique set of challenges that I kind of want to talk about today, because I think there are challenges with collecting today, but there's also benefits, and the same when you think about collecting in the future. So one of the main benefits of collecting for the Switch today, especially if you're collecting for some of those more niche titles, is that you can kind of get in at probably the lowest price possible, right? There are games that are being printed and created for the Switch today that 5 to 10 years from now could be triple or quadruple the price that they're worth today. Because the Switch is still in a phase where we're still discovering what the hidden gems are. We're still figuring out what some of the holy grails might be. And don't get me wrong, there are bona fide grails on the Switch even to this point and to this day. There are definitely games that are on the Switch physically that go for grail like prices. And when I say grail like prices, I mean 200, 300, even $400 for a single physical game. You do have some games that go for that much on the Switch today. However, because new games are being released all the time, there's a higher probability of you being able to catch a grail at a decent price of $35 and not having to pay that much for that game in the future. So there is that benefit there if you're thinking about collecting for the Switch today. Also, you're able to capitalize on titles while they're still relatively in abundance. I believe that based on the number of Switch units sold, and how many people are actually still playing the Switch to this day, as well as the backwards compatibility of the Switch 2, you're going to see a lot of these games go missing. I don't know if you've actually seen a Nintendo Switch cartridge, but those cartridges are extremely easy to lose. I have a 4-year-old who plays the Switch, and I have to make sure that as soon as we take a cartridge out of the console, it immediately goes into its case, because I know 9 times out of 10 that cartridge is going to go missing. And so that's one of the I would say, a couple of the benefits of collecting today. The one of the drawbacks, or what could be seen as a negative with collecting today, again, is the nonstop water hose of new releases that come out all the time. And you could find yourself wanting to buy, you could buy one Switch game for every day of the week. and have a new game to play. That's how many games it feels like are being released on the Switch. Now, if you decided that you were going to pause and wait and collect for the Switch in the future, the good thing is that because of the media format, the way the Switch games are formatted, while yes, they're easy to lose, because they're in a cartridge-based format, I would tend to think that these cartridges will hopefully last a lot longer into the future and have a much longer lifespan than, say, like disc-based games. Now, don't get me wrong. I've been playing games that are disc-based that are in some cases, 30 years old at this point. So it's not to say that disc-based games will rot away in a matter of 10 to 15 years. However, cartridges have just been proven to have a little bit of a longer shelf life than disc-based games. I mean, if you consider the fact that we're still playing original Atari games, you can still play original Nintendo games, you're still playing cartridges that were manufactured in the 80s and in some cases in the 70s, right? So there's a level of durability that you get from a cartridge, which I think gives a lot of buyers a little bit of comfort in knowing that even if they waited to pick up Switch games in the future, that you'll have that reliability in terms of the actual physical media working for you in the future. But the other benefit I would say of waiting on Switch collecting, and I mean building a heavy library of Switch collections, is that you get the benefit of hindsight, right? There have been a lot of instances with Switch collecting where you do have games that shoot up in price and shoot up in value, and for a while they might seem to be one of the most expensive games on the console, but then either the manufacturer or the publisher decides that they're going to, or even a third party, they decide that they're going to reprint the game. And these reprints can sometimes cause prices to drop for some of these really expensive games. And if you were one of those folks who decided to wait to pick up or build your collection, you might be able to take advantage of these price drops and get some of these really expensive games at a really cheap price. A good example of this would be a game like Ape Out by Devolver. Now, there was a point where a sealed copy of Ape Out was going for at least $150 to $200. I remember when Ape Out was one of the most rare and expensive games on the Nintendo Switch. But what happened was Devolver decided to do a general reprint and re-release of this game, which caused the price of Ape Out to significantly drop in a matter of months. And we've seen this happen with a few other Switch games that have gotten reprints. And it doesn't always happen in that case, but there are some instances where some of these reprints do impact the price of the game. We saw it with The Messenger. The Messenger was a game that was really expensive, and then it got a general reprint. And I don't know if the price has tanked because I haven't checked the prices on The Messenger recently, but it does impact the price of a lot of these games. And so when you consider the fact that a lot of these Switch games there's a potential for them to be reprinted at any time, it also means that you have a little bit more of a window to build your physical collection when it comes to the original Switch. And you don't have to feel as, I would say, pressured. The feeling of FOMO isn't as poignant when it comes to collecting for the Switch because we're still in a phase in the Switch's life cycle where a third party or someone is willing to reprint these games. It's not like the PlayStation or the Super Nintendo where someone's going to remanufacture copies of a PlayStation 1 game in the exact same format of its original release. If we do get reprints of Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, PlayStation, or Dreamcast games, usually they're done by a non-licensed third-party manufacturer that's going to give you the cartridge in some kind of, awkward color that doesn't really resemble its original format. And of course, they have to do that for, due to licensing and copyright purposes, avoid getting sued and things like that. But if to a collector, that doesn't feel original. It doesn't feel like it's being delivered to you in its original form. And so I think that's where a lot of the FOMO comes from when it comes to collecting retro games or games that, you really don't see any kind of reprint in its original format coming anytime soon. The Switch is a little bit different in that way, in that despite us being, able to access this library for a number of years now, there is still that high potential that your favorite game or the game that you consider a grail will be made available to you via reprint. And this makes collecting for physical Switch games a little bit more easier if you're doing it after the fact. And so I think, we do have a longer runway when it comes to collecting for physical Switch games in terms of not feeling the need to buy out of FOMO, because I think the opportunities will be there. I know that there are a lot of people right now who are building their Switch collection who feel like they need to go out and get every Switch game as it comes out. And, hats off to you. You may want to play the game as soon as it comes out, and maybe that's why you want to go ahead and pick it up. But for the collectors who are just picking up Switch games because, you've got this like feeling of FOMO, like I need to get these games before they're no longer available, I personally think that physical Switch collecting does have a decent runway. And with, putting the exceptions and the anomalies aside, right? Those few games that are astronomically expensive, putting those games aside, I think that for the most part, a lot of the games that most people will enjoy, even the niche and off the beaten path titles, I think those will still be available for Switch collectors in the future. So you guys let me know what you think. Do you think the pressure is on you on now to collect for the Switch? Or do you think collectors in the future who try to retroactively collect for the console will feel the pressure then? Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.